Thank you, first of all, for being here. Anders Lustgarten.
That's right.
Hope I'm pronouncing
I say Anders Lustgarten, but that's just because of living in a country where we speak English.
Yeah.
Neither of those words is an English word. So
All right.
Yeah.
So your name, nothing to do with Scandinavia?
No, you can blame my mum for that one. My mum's bizarre 1970s preoccupation with skiing, goat cheese and Scandinavian things. Came up with a short list of 3, the other 2 were Sven and Bjorn, so I feel like I've done okay.
So we're happy with Anders.
We are.
That's good.
Yeah.
Anders, I want to tell me, could you take me a little bit through to the process that led you to writing a play called Lampedusa? As we all know, there was this terrible shipwreck in 2013. 2 years later, I guess, your play opens with the same title. What was the immediate impact when you experienced the catastrophe like all the rest of us, and how did it suddenly?
Well, it didn't seem to be making an impact. That's, I think, why I wrote the play originally. Yeah. Like, it was quite obvious to me from having worked on. So before I wrote plays in a serious way, which really sort of began in about 2012, 2013, I was working as an activist for about 10 years. Looking at development banks particularly. And development banks are really some of the nastiest institutions we don't know about.
Yes.
They're kind of the modern implements of colonialism.
Yes.
Development banks use Western public money to crack open southern economies to give the profits to Western corporations.
So that's where you had your focus actually?
Yeah. So I was working in 2011, I was working a lot in the Arab Spring countries, and I was looking at the way that people like or institutions like the European Investment Bank, which is really one of the nastiest institutions nobody knows about, which has about 80 billion euros per year to privatize, to force developing country governments to let down trade tariffs, to let in private corporations, to do dodgy deals offshore particularly. As an activist, what I was seeing over time was that you used to find that a big petroleum company would do a mine or a pipeline or something like that in a poor country, and they would want Western support to do it. What I was finding then is that they've now moved to doing everything through the offshore system. So I think you can trace an awful lot of today's social problems to financial capitalism.
Yes, because that's
particularly to the offshore system. So
you jump right into something I wanted to talk to you about, namely considering the refugee crisis, the migration crisis. Right. What should we call it? Because it's very much about.
I think we should call it the capitalism crisis. I think we should call it the consequences of capitalism.
Yeah.
It's pretty clear to me that some of the main drivers behind mass migration are the impacts of Western capitalism on the rest of the world. So, in the most direct way, you have Western military intervention. You know, most of these boats that are going to Lampedusa leave from Libya. Libya is a client state for people smugglers. Libya was completely destroyed after Gaddafi was no longer useful to Western governments, and replaced with nothing. So it's now a kind of giant black hole, basically, where the main industry is people smuggling.
So hold on a minute. So just for the listener who's not
up to date
with it, in October 3rd, is it, of 2013, there's a boat leaving the Libyan shore with a lot of people going to Italy.
That's right.
And off the shore of this small island, Lampedusa, goes down, and the numbers
about 350 people drowned.
368, 350. The numbers are a little blurry.
And that's just the one that one that first broke into public consciousness. There were drownings before that.
But what you're saying is actually, to you, it should come as no surprise that something like this at some point would occur.
Oh yeah, right? Totally. I think that if you want to look at these phenomena, we always look at these things from the end result. We go, look at all these people coming here. Yes. What are we going to do about all these people coming here? And that is, we can talk about that, but if you want to look at the at solving any problem, you have to look at its causes. And its causes are these fundamental drivers of mass migration, are the disruption of the social fabric. The fact that it's basically more and more impossible to live in the developing world because of, I would say, 3 things. One of which is Western military intervention, so the bombing of Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria,
let's
all of these
take out the bad guy, but then
what are we
what?
going to do instead? Right, and then then you end up obviously have massive social dislocation as a result of that. Number two is climate change.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you can look, for example, at the Syrian conflict as
Yeah.
being the world's first climate change war. Right? There was a huge drought in Syria between 2005 and 2010. They basically had no rain, and 1 million people left the land because they couldn't live anymore and went to the cities. And that's where the kind of resistance movement to Assad began. And it's a very complicated thing. We don't want to gloss over it, but the sort of social pressure behind a lot of people not being able to live the way they used to is down to climate change, and a lot of historically climate change is obviously the responsibility of the West.
Yes.
And the modern day China and India have a big part to play as well. But we look at they're about to put a president in. Well, we may not get a president, given his apparent inability to even hold a press conference. But they're about to put in a president who doesn't believe in climate change. So that's the second thing. But the third thing that I think people never like to think about is Western economic intervention, going all the way back to colonialism. But in the modern day stuff I was looking at, through the form of Western economic institutions like
that
the World
takes
Bank,
us back to what you said about
the World
the bank.
Bank, the European Investment Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So in 2011, for example, I was spending quite a lot of time in some of the Arab Spring countries, and it was incredible how quickly these development banks, particularly the EIB and the EBRD, were jumping into Egypt or jumping into Morocco and saying, right, we will help you, and our definition of help is we will give you small amounts of money that will allow us to then privatise, sell off, and
the
profiteer from the infrastructure of
and the
places.
consequences of privatisation.
And a lot of the money ends up going. So for example, the one of the first things that I guess take it back a little bit. The previous regime, before the Arab Spring, the Mubarak regime, had privatised the largest chain of department stores in Egypt, and that had thrown thousands and thousands of people out of work. And they had taken the profits from that and they'd hidden it in Cyprus. So one of the things I was looking at was you go to Cyprus and you're like, where's all these things that they're registered in these offshore entities? But a lot of these offshore entities are not that offshore. They're in the city of London, or they're in Zurich, or they're in Cyprus, and you're trying to track the trails of money. But the basic consequence of the modern development system, to boil it down to something really simple if people don't really understand this, is that mega corporations and rich individuals, both Western and Southern, take the proceeds of sales of public assets and they hide them offshore in the Cayman Islands or in whatever, and the money is sucked systematically out of Southern economies.
Yeah.
The work is sucked systematically out of Southern economies. So what are those people going to do to live?
Yeah.
And you add to that the social pressures of war, the social pressures of climate change. You're getting people on boats for all of these reasons. And
So hold on a second, Anders. What you're saying is the destabilization of the countries from which these people depart. This destabilization is not a nature-given thing.
No,
It's very much a thing that can be lost very easily for the common Scandinavians, say, into a hyper-complex system of things we cannot overlook. But what you're saying is it's not a given thing.
No,
There's some interests going on, and these interests are very much manifested in the way we talk about these situations.
Yes,
Hence my question about what should we call the crisis? And call the
I'd say it's the consequences of capitalism, very simple. And one of the reasons I've structured Lampedusa the way it is I want to put two of the main consequences of capitalism.
Tell us a little about what do you do in Lampedusa? You take a
So
man's
the
voice.
story of Lampedusa is basically the story of the people whose job it is to clear up the shit of the rich.
Yes.
It's basically the people who are made responsible for enforcing extremely cruel new systems implemented by European elites at the expense of both the European poor and the migrating poor. So one guy, Stefano, who is a fisherman in Lampedusa. Lampedusa is the southernmost point of the European Union.
Yes.
So it's the easiest point for migrant ships to aim for people trying to claim asylum or get work in Europe. Most of those seas have been fished out. So a lot of the ex-fishermen now are working as coast guards or working, and this guy's, one of his main jobs is to pull the dead people out of the sea. And he cannot afford to think of those people as people, because you couldn't pull 300 of your friends or 300 people you care about out of the sea. You could only do that to people who you fundamentally don't regard as quite as important as you or quite as human as you, because it's impossible as a human being,
of course,
to feel that much grief. So his job is basically to keep the consequences of this global system of exploitation at arm's length, not to put a human face on it. And the drama comes when it develops a human face. And the other side of the story is a woman called Denise, who is based in Leeds, a town in northern England, a poor part of Leeds called Beeston. And she collects payday loans. Now, you don't have payday loans in Scandinavia because you don't have the same disgusting neoliberal capitalism that we have. But payday loans are incredibly high interest, very short-term loans that are only taken out by poor people, literally to get them through to payday. So it's 2,000% APR. My paycheck's coming next week. Something like this in the UK, this is extraordinary. This is really the nature of contemporary capitalism that people don't really think about. 60% of people who are claiming, who are using food banks or claiming some kind of benefits are working in Britain. So it's no longer a case of the unemployed versus the employed. It's a case of people who are employed by capitalist regimes that pay them so badly that they have to make up enough money to eat elsewhere, mainly by government subsidy. So one of the great lies, of course, of capitalism is that it doesn't involve the government, and that is just bullshit at every single level. Yeah. It involves government subsidy for everything from oil companies and their offshore activities to tax breaks to paying people in benefits enough to make up the shortfall of what they don't get in wages. People are paid so badly that they have to take out these loans or take out benefits. So if you take out the loan and you pay it back next week, you're okay. But if you take out the loan and you don't pay it back for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, very quickly you're in trouble. So Denise's job is to collect these loans.
Yeah. So
from people who don't or
for Denise and for Stephanie, for both of them applies what you said. They clean out the shit of the...
Exactly so, and they can't afford to see the people they're dealing with as human beings.
Right.
And the drama and the humanity of the play comes when they have to see the people they're dealing with with a human face.
Yes.
Because of the human connection that they develop. And that, I think, is very important because our political system spends an enormous amount of time, and our media spend an enormous amount of time dehumanizing the victims of global capitalism, making you think it's their fault, making you think they're parasites, making you think they're scumbags. And its number one way of doing that is a very old technique of divide and rule. Yeah. You blame the migrants for the problems of the poor, and you blame the poor for the problems of the migrants, and you make them fight each other.
Right.
And so the structural point of Lampedusa, the juxtaposition, is to show that those people are victims of the very same system.
Right. So would you agree with me that actually for you, what you take on here is the human side of it, but for you it's really the starting point? Yeah. If you could get people to consider what is this, then you really want people to consider what's then behind this.
Yeah. And all of my plays are basically, they take quite a lot of planning because they are very sharp and well-considered analyses of the malice of our contemporary political and economic system, but hopefully without any real sense of a lecture or any real sense of me telling you what to think.
I think what you really contribute with is yes, they do. They give a human story, but also it's an interesting pointing to this question about the narratives. If you take something like this Mare Nostrum operation that was setting in around the time of the first shipwrecks. It lasted for a year, and then it was dismantled and replaced by this Frontex system. And where the narrative of the Mare Nostrum was to save lives, the narrative of the Frontex was to protect borders. And I think what people in Scandinavia also right now are really have been successfully talked into is that this is a question about protecting your borders. Of course, for Denmark, the big thing is this ever prolonged border control, which we are very.
It's pretty simple. I think people are completely entitled to feel insecure, and I completely understand their desire for more security. What I would say to them is be more intelligent about what is making you insecure. Because what is making you insecure is not other victims of the system, is not some kid from Syria or a woman from Afghanistan who's, tried to avoid being raped and has got on a truck. What's making you insecure is the fact that your economy and your society are controlled by an ever smaller number of extremely wealthy people who have nothing but contempt for your everyday existence.
Anders Lustgarten, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you for coming.
It's my pleasure.
And LAMPEDUSA can be seen here at Husets Teater. How is it this week and next?